This is the last book in the Old Testament, and it's the last book in the Old Testament, both in terms of where it sits in the Old Testament, in terms of book order, but also in terms of written order. And Malachi was around during the days of Nehemiah and Ezra, of whom we've read. And so 2 weeks ago, when I was last here, we looked at Nehemiah, and we're talking about 444 BC. Nehemiah comes back, and that's where Nehemiah 8 is, at about 444 BC. And the book of Malachi is probably written somewhere in between 444 and 425 BC. And so it's the last written book that we have in the Bible until Jesus comes around. And John the Baptist breaks the silence. So we start with Malachi chapter 3. God's people have come back to the promised land. They've been there about 100 years now, back in the promised land after their exile in Babylon. And they haven't been that faithful. And so we read a little bit. Carl read for us this morning about how they gathered again around the law of God. And Ezra read that for them, and they responded. And so this Malachi deals with those who are still wondering if following God has any worth for us. Malachi chapter 3, beginning in verse 13. This is God's word, eternally true. You have said harsh things against me, says the Lord. Yet you ask, what have we said against you? You have said, it is futile to serve God. What did we gain by carrying out his requirements and going about like mourners before the Lord Almighty? But now we call the arrogant blessed. Certainly the evildoers prosper, and even those who challenge God escape. Then those who feared the Lord talked with each other, and the Lord listened and heard. A scroll of remembrance was written in his presence concerning those who feared the Lord and honored his name. They will be mine, says the Lord Almighty, in the day when I make up my treasured possession. I will spare them, just as in compassion a man spares his son who serves him. And you will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. Surely the day is coming. It will burn like a furnace. All the arrogant and every evildoer will be stubble. And that day that is coming will set them on fire, says the Lord Almighty. Not a root or a branch will be left to them. But for you who revere my name, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go out and leap like calves released from the stall. Then you will trample down the wicked. They will be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day when I do these things, says the Lord Almighty. Remember the law of my servant Moses, the decrees and laws I gave him at Horeb for all Israel. Now we're going to back up and go to chapter 3, at the beginning of chapter 3 and verse 2. So Malachi chapter 3, verse 2. But who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? For he will be like a refiner's fire or a launderer's soap. He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver. He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. Then the Lord will have men who will bring offerings in righteousness, and the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be acceptable to the Lord, as in days gone by, as in former years. Here ends our reading. We have a response of thankfulness that's printed for us there in our bulletins. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks indeed. Let's pray. We don't have that much of a translational jump when we look at 3:13 here, and you look at that statement and what God says about his people, that he says, you've said harsh things about me. And we have even kind of in slang expression now the term harsh. We say, oh, harsh. And God looks at what his people have said about him, and he says, That's harsh that you're saying that about me. You're misrepresenting me, and it's a harsh way, and I'm offended by this. And so this morning we're going to look at what God is so offended by, or what is a harsh thing to say or to believe about the Lord. You see, I've entitled this gospel lesson, Two False Beliefs, Things We're Not to Believe, Two False Beliefs About Walking in God's Ways. And it's very prevalent, and I don't mean just prevalent outside the church. I mean prevalent in the church as well, these false beliefs. At least one of them in the church is spread very much. So harsh things said against the Lord. And if you like to fill out blanks in your outline, that's the first one right there. There are harsh things that we can say against the Lord, and this is a couple specific things that we look at this morning. Number one. First, we look at two false beliefs about walking in God's ways. And that's what we're talking about here. Do I walk in God's ways, or do I ignore God's ways? Do I walk according to his commands, in obedience to his commands, or do I not concern myself with his commands? And so we look at this false belief that God's people had, or some of God's people had during these days of Nehemiah and Ezra and Malachi. The first false belief is this, and it's printed right there in verse 14. Here's the first false belief. It is futile. It is futile to walk in God's ways. It's futile. For in walking in God's ways, there is no gain. No gain. So those are your words, futile and gain. And that's what God's people were saying about him, about God, and about his ways, about his commands. They were saying it's futile to walk in God's way. Now, futile is an interesting word, and I actually looked at how this word gets translated across the Old Testament. It's empty, it's vain, futile, without meaning, to no effect, to no profit. So God's people were saying, some of God's people were saying, it's to no profit, it's of no gain to you, it's of no benefit, there's no payoff for you to walk in God's ways. There's no gain, no profit. So we see this in verse 14 there. You've said it's futile to serve God. What did we gain by carrying out his requirements and going about like mourners before the Lord Almighty? You see that reference there to Nehemiah 8. God's people, when they first heard God's word after not hearing it, maybe ever, and Ezra reads it to them, they mourn because they're grief-stricken over how far they have gotten astray from God's ways. But verse 15, here's what they said. This is their attitude. They were saying, it's the arrogant people who are blessed. Arrogance is fine. And besides the arrogant being blessed, they said, certainly evildoers prosper. And then lastly, those who challenge God escape. There's no consequence of challenging God from saying, God, you've commanded this, but I don't care. And there will be no consequence, and you won't do anything about it. That's challenging God. And they said to the people, there's escape for somebody who does that. Even those who challenge God escape. And you see the reference here, evildoers prosper. What's the idea? Don't worry about following God's requirements, carrying out his requirements. Don't worry about that, because evildoers prosper. If you want to prosper, just do evil and don't worry about it. Or, at the beginning of verse 15, they were calling the arrogant blessed. Now, if we've been around the church at all and we look at Jesus at all, we see that it's the humble who are blessed. God lifts up the humble, but he brings down the proud. But God's people were saying that the ideal is that you be proud. And you can think about the Pharisees in this. They were the ones who were blessed, right? The arrogant. Those who said, my life is all okay. And I can look down upon others. So, Ecclesiastes 1:2, Carl read for us. This gets at what Solomon declares about life as he looks around. This is an understandable viewpoint to have. If you watch sports at all, you know that this is encapsulated in the idea that a team needs to have swagger. That means arrogance. That means other teams are below us. And you know what happens to teams who regain their swagger? They get upset. And I mean, they get beat. Then they get upset. Our society says that's what somebody needs to have. They've lost their swagger. They need to have swagger. They need to have this arrogance. I'm better than others. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before fall. That's what Solomon says elsewhere in Proverbs. Okay. So Solomon looks around and he says it's all meaninless. Chapter 8, verse 14, I think is the very center point of the book of Ecclesiastes. He says, a righteous man gets a wicked man's reward, and the wicked man gets the righteous man's reward. In other words, if you do what's right, you get dumped on. And if you do what's wrong and what's evil, you prosper. And that's one of the big points about Psalms and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. In real life, the wicked appear to prosper. People who cheat win. And so if we just look on the surface, and Ecclesiastes is all about that, if you're just looking at appearances, it's all meaningless. You can't tell if someone's prospering if it's because they've been doing well, doing good, or because it's been doing evil. You can't tell. The results, what you can see, are meaningless. And that's the point that Solomon keeps driving in the book of Ecclesiastes. And that's what the people were saying during Malachi's day. It doesn't matter. Be arrogant. The evildoer prospers. It doesn't matter to obey God's law. There's no payoff, or there's no gain. There's no profit, as it says there, Profit, in verse 14. Verse 15 there in Malachi 3, it appears as we look around, that the arrogant are blessed. It's not the ones who walk in humility who are blessed in appearance. It appears as we look around that the evildoers are prospering, not those who follow Jesus. Those who follow Jesus lose their jobs and lose their lives and are made fun of at work and at school and in their neighborhood and made to feel ashamed. And those who challenge God seem to be escaping. People do evil, and there's not instantaneous justice in the world. Often the wicked just get promoted. So Philippians 2, 5 through 8 that Bob read for us is proof of this. Jesus does only righteousness. He obeys his Father in everything, even to the point of death. His Father says to him, okay, here's the ultimate point of obedience, son. If you will obey me, go die. Go die for this people who are not looking to you and not looking to me and who are not faithful. Go die for this wicked and ungrateful people whom I will give to you as your kingdom. And Jesus is asked that as a point of obedience. And Paul tells us that Jesus was obedient to the point of death. And what does it get Jesus? Well, it appears, as he's on the cross, it just gets him death. Obey the Father, obey God, and you get despised and mocked and beaten and shamed and put on a cross. That's life. Okay? We don't get it as bad as Jesus, gladly. Or Philippians 3:7. Paul says, following Christ and walking in his ways caused him to lose everything. He recounts for us all the status he had. He was an evildoer, prospering, putting Christians to death even, and climbing up in the Jewish ranks with all this pedigree and all this education, and everybody in the Jewish nation, saying how wonderful is Saul of Tarsus, and he loses it all for following God. When he finds out who God is, Jesus speaking to him on the road to Damascus. So, two false beliefs. One false belief is it's futile to walk in God's ways because there's no gain or no profit, only loss. And then a B, second false belief is that following God's ways is mourning, M-O-U-R, mourning, grief, mourning. That's verse 14 as well. And we saw this in Nehemiah 8, 9 and 11. When God's people are exposed to God's word, as Ezra the scribe reads God's word to them in Jerusalem in 444 BC, their response is mourning. They're in repentance because they realize how out of line with God's ways are their life. But these accusers in Malachi's day are leaving it there. They're saying, well, if you follow God, there will be mourning. But that's not what happened. See, they had experienced this, and that's what they were saying. That they're saying all this stuff about God and going to church and hearing God's word. It's all about grief and mourning, and you got to be sober, straight-laced, and sad, right? But they missed the point. What's going on in Nehemiah 8? The mourning is over lack of conformity to God's will. Mourning is not the result of following God. See, in Nehemiah 8, when people follow God, there's the opposite. The mourning is over when we have been disobedient to God's will. And so this accusation is false, that following in God's ways is mourning to you. Not following in God's ways brings mourning. I love Billy Joel. He's got the worst life philosophy of maybe all singers who sing about anything that actually has connection from one end of the song to the other. But one of the songs I really loved, and even as a non-believer, about a year before as a non-believer, I knew there was something wrong about it. His song, Only the Good Die Young, he probably knew I was going to bring that one up. I'd rather laugh with the sinners than die with the saints. The sinners have much more fun. I'd rather laugh with the sinners than cry with the saints. The sinners have much more fun. And that's what the people during Malachi's day were. See, there's nothing new under the sun. Right? Billy Joel's just singing Ecclesiastes for us, unbeknownst to him. Well, maybe he knows that he's Jewish. But that's what we think. Following Christ is just mourning. The world says this to each of us each day. Oh, you're not going to do that? Oh, but this is fun. Come follow us. Do this. Oh, that doesn't matter. That qualm you have at work. Or what, you're not going to do this, at school with friends at school or whatever. And they paint it like things are bad for us. And indeed, it looks that way for Jesus. Walking in God's ways bring him mourning and grief. And he's in Gethsemane, and he's grieving and crying out to the Lord, Father, if you can take this cup from me, take it. But not my will, but your will be done. Those who are around the cross, indeed, they're grieving and they're mourning. And part of that is they don't have the spiritual sight at the time to realize that what's happening. If they had realized what was happening, there would be a joy within them. For thou, my God, hast died for me. They would see that that's happening before their eyes. And so that brings us to what's true about these two statements. We've talked about these statements are false, that it's futile to walk in God's ways, and walking in God's ways just brings you mourning. But number two, the truth about these false thoughts about walking in God's ways. A, walking in God's ways, here's the truth. Walking in God's ways brings true gain. Walking in God's ways brings true gain. Jesus talks about this in a big way in Luke 9. He says, for whoever wants to save his life, to keep walking in the ways that aren't the Lord's way, just save your life the way it is. For he who wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me will save it. What good is it for a man to gain the whole world? Okay, the perspective of the naysayers in Malachi's day, just gain the world. Be an evildoer, you'll prosper. But Jesus says, what value is it, what gain, what good is it for a man to gain the whole world, yet lose or forfeit his very self or his own soul? Not walking in God's ways is exchanging your soul. It's turning it in, losing it to get a goat. Those of you who are old enough know the old game show, Monty Hall, Let's Make a Deal. And there were 3 curtains, and he'd go out in the audience, and somebody would stand up with them, and they could either bail out and get a little bit of money, or there'd be a car behind one curtain and goats behind the other 2. And so they'd say, curtain number 1, are you sure about that? Yeah, curtain number 1. That show open. But God's people can exchange their souls for a goat. Non-believers exchange their souls for a goat. And Jesus brings that point up to us. Don't exchange your soul. Don't exchange your soul. They'll give you the whole world. Jesus endured that during his temptation in the wilderness, didn't he? Satan said, "Here are all the kingdoms of the world. They belong to me. I'm the king in the kingdom of the world. Outside of the kingdom of God, these people who believe in me, it's the kingdom of the world. It's mine. I'll give it to you." But Jesus won't take it. He won't exchange his own soul for the whole world, because he knows it is gain to serve the Lord, to worship him only. Philippians 2, 9 through 11, the rest of that Philippians 2 passage, we find out that following in God's ways for Jesus winds up with apparent shame, apparent grief, apparent mourning, apparent loss, because he's up there on the cross. His obedience costs him his death, his very life. But Philippians 2 goes on, and verses 9 through 11 show us, but that following in God's ways earns him the name that is above every name, to which every knee shall bow and every tongue confess him as Lord, as ruler of all. So our following in God's ways has only apparent loss, but it's not the loss of anything that's really valuable. It's the loss of stuff that the world says is valuable that's really empty, vain, without profit. So, walking in God's ways brings you true gain. What do you gain? What do you gain by walking in God's ways? What have you gained by turning to Jesus? Number 1, there in your outline, you've gained, and here's verse 17, being the Lord's. That's nothing to sneeze at. To be the Lord's possession. Not only to be the Lord's possession, but there in verse 17 as well, to be treasured by God. We're his treasured possession. This comes out of Deuteronomy chapter 7 when God talks about his own people. When we choose to follow after Christ, we become his. We become the Lord's when we become treasured. I was no credit to me. I was a treasured person in my family, and it was just because I was the youngest. So I was the youngest kid of 3. Now I had a friend when I was on staff with Campus Crusade for Christ at Indiana University. Betsy and I had a friend named Pete Smith, and Pete had 3 or 4 older brothers, and his all boys. And his parents decided to go for try for a girl one more time, and they found out during this pregnancy that they had twins. And this was in the days of, he was born in about 1965. These were in the days where you didn't have sonograms and you couldn't find out the gender of your baby. And so Pete's brother came out, and a brother was a boy, contrary to popular opinion today. Okay, so his brother came out, so it was the fifth son. And so Pete was the last chance. And then Pete came out, and he was a boy too. And his mom had endured one last pregnancy just for a girl. And her last hope ended in the disappointment of Pete Smith. Pete always kidded. He said, "Oh, yeah, my mom thought I was a curse." And then he would tell that story. But this is not what God says of us. Your being in the church is not God saying, "Oh, no, another one." You are a treasured possession of the Lord. He's pulled you out of wherever he pulled you out of, and he treasures you. You belong to him. I love the Carly Simon song, you know it, "You Belong to Me." So soulful. But we belong to the Lord. We're his, and he treasures us. Because we belong to him, because he treasures us, number 3, we've been spared. We've been spared. We've been spared a couple of things. We can be spared of different things. When I was in 5th grade, I became very, very, very mean to one of my classmates who had been a friend of mine, and kind of gathered other friends to be mean to him as well. He's doing fine. He went to Princeton and Cornell for his 2 degrees, and he's written books, so he wasn't too damaged. I wrote him and apologized, and he said, "Don't worry about it." But it was awful, what I did to him in the 5th grade. But I experienced being spared in the 5th grade because I had an orthodontic appointment in the 5th grade, and it happened to be the morning that his father, a lawyer, came into school to take care of these kids who were not being nice to his boy. And so all my friends who I'd convinced to not be nice to this boy got it. Those were the days where you could get it, right, from somebody else's dad. Okay, you can't do that anymore. But they got it. And all my other friends got called down to the principal's office. Okay, but I was spared. But we've done these things, and God spares us because we're his. In his grace, because he's put our sins, our beings, upon his son Jesus, he spares us. How does he spare us? In a couple of ways. A, he spares us as we walk in his ways. He spares us of his corrective discipline. Right? We've talked about this in the past, especially as we've been in the prophets. Hebrews 12 and all the Old Testament speaks about how God, because he loves us, and because a loving father disciplines his sons, that when we are out of track or off track from following him, he disciplines us to give us wisdom to follow him the next time and be corrected in our path. And so we see this in these passages here. And so we get spared God's corrective discipline as we walk in his ways. But also, B, and we're talking about those who are in the church now, who can be in the church without true saving faith. Those who have weedy and thorny soil, or those who have rocky soil, to use the parable of Jesus in Matthew 13 and Mark 12, and wherever it is in Luke. I think it's Luke 8. That he spares us from eternal punishment and final judgment. Okay, that's what God does for us with his ways. See, there were people among God's people, chapter 4, verse 1, chapter 3, verses 2 and 3, chapter 3, verse 15, who were among God's people who were not believers. They were those who were saying, you know what, you can flick it in God's face and escape. Okay? Those weren't true believers. And so they were facing the day of the Lord coming to them. And who can survive? Chapter 3, verse 2. Who can stand on that day in their own merit without faith in Christ, without the transfer of sins onto Jesus at the cross that we see through faith? So God spares us of corrective discipline if we're believers. He spares us from eternal punishment ultimately. And then number 4, what else do we get? What other gain is there? We get the Lord's compassion. We get the Lord's compassion. And we see that word listed for us there in verse 18, chapter 3, verse 18. We get the Lord's compassion now and at final judgment. So we experience the Lord's compassion through life. We experience the Lord's compassion when we stand before him, when Jesus brings all men and women, boys and girls, and angels to account. Nehemiah 9:19 says, because of your great compassion, you did not abandon them in the desert. Nehemiah 9:27, from heaven you heard them, and in your great compassion, you gave them deliverers who rescued them from the hand of their enemies. And verse 28 of Nehemiah 9, they cried out to you again, you heard from heaven, and in your compassion, you delivered them time after time. And this is what we experience in our lives, God's compassion to us. We don't live as we should in God's ways, but he continues to be compassionate to us. What else do you gain? And here's a big one for you, number 5. The environment of the church, heaven, and the new heaven and new earth. There's blessing, isn't there, when we come to the church? We're not challenged in our faith when we come to the church. When we come to the church, we can sing to the Lord without people making fun of us and saying, what are you doing? When we come to the church, we can talk about what we believe and why we're living our lives in a certain way, and other people can say, that's right. You can say, I've experienced that too. I followed the Lord and my soul was satisfied, and we're encouraged. This is an environment, and God gives it to us, and it's gain in our lives. In this world of much loss, like Paul experienced loss, there's great gain as we come to the church. And it's like Jesus said, hey, if you follow me and you lose your brother and your sister and your mother and your father and your children and all your friends, if they all abandon you, you'll gain that much in brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers in the church. 100-fold. If you follow me and you lose those 8 people or 2 people or however big your family is, you gain the whole church, and they become your brothers and sisters and fathers to you who raise you up in the faith. Mothers to you who nurture you in the faith. And so God gives us great gain as we walk in his ways. Walking in his ways, we're in his church. And this is great gain to us. It helps us live according to the way we've been framed, that we experience blessing in life. Do you see that there in this passage here? Look at that section there at the beginning of chapter 3 that we looked at the end when we read. God talks about first the mass of Israel. Most. Those who weren't believing. Verse 2. Who can endure the day of his coming? Who can stand when he appears? The answer, nobody who's like this. For he will be, God, when he comes, will be like a refiner's fire. He'll sort out the dross, the crappy stuff that's not real gold and not real silver. Or a launderer's soap. He'll get the dirt out and just leave the clean in. He will sit as a refiner and a purifier of silver. You know how you purify gold and silver? You burn it until it's liquid. So who can endure that? He will purify the Levites and refine them like gold and silver. The Levites were being wicked. That's a whole section here in Malachi. Then the Lord will have men who will bring, here's the blessing of being in the church. The Lord says not everybody will fall at the Lord's coming. But when the Lord comes, then the Lord will have men who will bring offerings in righteousness. And the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be acceptable to the Lord as in days gone by, as in former years. Can you imagine being part of this group under Nehemiah and Ezra and Malachi here, and you're surrounded by these people who are promoting evil doing. And God says, but I will come and I'll sort out all those people away from you. So there's no more nastiness and gossip and politics and encouragement to do wrong and feeling weird for wanting to do the Lord's will. I'll just sort all that out. I'll wash Israel with soap, and all the dirt will fall off. I'll rinse you clean, and you'll just be left, and it'll be everybody else who also wants to follow the Lord. That's what the church is. We get this respite once a week where we get to be around other people who want to follow the Lord. Now, magnify that when you die and you're in heaven, because everyone around you, you know the Lord's Prayer, that we. I don't know the Lord's Prayer. I'm going to look. Your will be done on earth. May we do your will here on earth. Your believers, your people, we do your will on earth as it's done in heaven. In heaven, God's will is being done with perfection. Those who have died, their souls have been stripped of their sin natures, and they're up there loving each other and loving God in perfection. Can you imagine that kind of environment? Is that gain? Where everybody around you is saying, what can I do to love you? What can I do to treat you as I would like to be treated? Is that gain? And we get to experience that a little bit in the church, don't we? A group of people who say, how can I encourage this sister? How can I encourage this brother? How can I lift this person up? How can I cheer this person? That's great gain to us. So it's great gain to us now in the church. It's great to us even more so in heaven. And then in the final state, in the new heavens and new earth, of course, it's great gain for us, where there is not even the existence on earth of anybody who's not following the Lord with all his heart, soul, mind, and strength, and who's not loving his neighbor as himself. So, A there in your outline. The church, the heaven, the new earth, that's where there is a distinction made between the righteous and the wicked. Okay, so you can see that in verse 18. Look at verse 18 of chapter 3. God again comforts his people. This is this group of people who's heard all the accusations. Don't follow in God's ways. There's no gain in it. And God's people get together, don't they? In verse 13, those who feared the Lord talked with each other. You know, they're in this little huddle in Israel. And God says there in verse 18, and you will again see the distinction between the righteous and the wicked, between those who serve God and those who do not. See, in their day, it was all mixed. They were all living as faithful people in the midst of religious people who weren't following the Lord's way, who didn't care about the Lord's ways. And God says, when I visit, I will separate, I will make a distinction between those who believe and are following me and those who don't. And Jesus did come once already, and he made that distinction, didn't he? There were Jews who followed him, and then Gentiles who followed him. And there became this persecuted community called the church that we're a part of. And there's this distinction, and this distinction is made every Sunday morning, isn't it? Between those who serve the Lord and those who don't. And that's relief to our souls. Betsy and I were at the Carolina football game yesterday, and it was like 81, and we were in the sun, and we looked down in front of us at the team, and they had these big fans, and in front of the fans were these misters going up. So it's water going up in front of the fan, and then the fan would then spread the mist there, and so players could walk in front of that and get cooled down. And Betsy and I wanted to go down there and get refreshed. So, but that's what this is like when we come to the church. It's this refreshing where this distinction is made between those who serve the Lord and those who don't. Okay. And then B, in the church in heaven, the new heaven and the new earth, we are surrounded by believers seeking to love you and to walk in God's ways. You're not surrounded by people who are looking out for their own personal interests, their own sinful interests, regardless of what that means for you. You're surrounded by people surrounded by people who are looking to love you. Some of you, maybe most of us, have grown up in homes where maybe you've seen abuse, or maybe you've seen divorce, maybe you've seen nasty arguments between folks in your home. Maybe you grew up in a home where there was kind of no instruction, or there was instruction to do what was wrong. And now here you sit and you see, all the destruction, all the harm that comes from that, and all the things that need to be repaired. But when you come into the church, when you come into heaven, you're brought into this environment where you're surrounded by people who aren't harming, who aren't abusing, who aren't looking out just for their own interests. Okay, so that's A. Walking in God's ways brings true gain, gives us the church, makes us God's possession that he treasures. It spares us from discipline and from final judgment, and we experience the Lord's compassion through our lives. And then B, the second thing, we're God's people during this day. We're saying following God's ways just brings mourning. It's just mourning. In contrast, walking in God's ways is joy. Walking in God's ways is joy. Chapter 4, verse 2. Look there. But you who revere my name, for you, the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in its wings, and you will go out and leap like calves released from the stall. There's great joy. Or Nehemiah 8:10, Carl read for us. God's people are mourning because their lives have been out of conformity with God's ways. But then they turn to the people, Ezra and the scribes, and they turn to them and they say, no, don't mourn. God's word, God's ways, learning of God's ways is a cause of rejoicing. And so they say, go and enjoy choice food and sweet drinks. This is appropriate. This is what knowing and following God's word brings us emotionally. Enjoy choice food and sweet drinks, and send some to those who have nothing prepared. This day is sacred to our Lord. Do not grieve, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. Be still. This is a sacred day. Do not grieve. See, sacred days, the things of the Lord, are occasions for us not to grieve, but for us to rejoice because the Lord's compassion is over us. In verse 12 of chapter 8 of Nehemiah, then all the people went away to eat and drink, to send portions of food, and to celebrate with great joy, because they now understood the words that had been made known to them. Understanding God's ways is a cause for joy, great joy. Jesus said in John 16:20, I tell you the truth, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. He's talking to his disciples about his death. The world would rejoice at his death. And we experience sometimes when evildoers get their way and the world rejoices, and we're mourning over that. You will grieve, he says, but your grief will be turned to joy. And he speaks of his resurrection there. And so we walk in this joy of the resurrection. We walk in the joy of knowing gain is truly ours, despite appearances in this life. And then, of course, Galatians 5:22, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy. So joy is what God's ways and following in God's ways brings to us. Jesus himself, through the grief of his death, though he despised the shame of the cross, Hebrews 12:2, he went forward, knowing the joy, it says there, knowing the joy that was before him. So that's for us. We experience joy in doing God's will, even though it's difficult to do God's will often, as it was for Jesus at the cross. So the world tells you joy is with us. Happiness is with us. But the world, while laughing now at times, is the way of eternal mourning and grief. If you look at Luke and the Beatitudes in Luke, you see he talks about those who laugh now. They will not be laughing. But we have joy now, and we have joy that is great when we see him face to face. So what do we do with this? Because, number 3, because following Christ is gain and joy, in contrast to what has been said by these people during Malachi's day, in contrast to what it's said by those who are outside the church today, who say, following Christ is a killer of your joy. Following Christ is just mourning for you. Because Christ is following gain and joy, here's the point of Malachi. A, serve him. Serve him. That means work for him. Do his bidding. Find out what you can do for him. And in the church, what ways am I gifted that can help in the church here? Build up his church. Use your gifts and abilities to do so. And we see that there in verse 3, or chapter 3, verse 14. It's told it's vain to serve the Lord, and God's answer is no, it's not. It's not vain to serve the Lord at all. It's great gain. B, second thing, and here's something we're afraid of in our culture, but God says through and through in the scriptures, fear him. Fear the Lord. God's not worried about qualifying that. Fear him. Fear him and honor his name. And this is an expression, if you just study Malachi thematically, this is huge in Malachi. And I've given you all the verses in Malachi that talk about fearing the Lord and honoring his name, calling the Lord great, honoring him, giving him the honor he deserves, fearing him. And what this talks about is that God is God, and he's great, and he's created the whole earth. I can't even create an art project that looks nice. I can't create out of nothing a car. But yet that's just a little puny thing out of all God's creation. God's created the universe. God could squash the entire earth, the entire universe now with this part of his pinky. And so fear him. It's right to say, you know what? God has the right to annihilate me, and he should have. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about fearing the Lord. He's not just my neighbor saying, yeah, you should check that out. Okay. The Lord's words are not like that. No, when the Lord says you should do this, guess what? You should do this. Fear him and honor his name. And that's what we do in formal ways in worship as we come together. We honor his name. This is certainly the third commandment. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Don't use it in an empty way where it means nothing. Don't say, oh my gosh, and don't even say, oh my gosh. Just get a different expression. But certainly don't put God's name in there. And don't use the Jesus name as an expletive, as a word you'd say like crap. Okay, here's my category. You got crap and darn and Jesus, all in one. No, the Lord's not in that category of things we can use to say, oh, that really stinks. Okay? He's not at our disposal. Neither are we to take his name on our back and to be a Christian and have that mean nothing or be vanity, empty. Okay? When we take his name on our back through faith in Christ and we become a Christian, that's not an empty thing. That bears itself out in fruit and walking in his ways. And so we seek to honor his name. Hallowed be your name. We pray at least each week, don't we? Hallowed be your name. So fear him. So serve him. Fear him, honor his name, and then see, because of this, or in order to do this, we know and follow his commands. We know and follow his commands. 3:14 there, it says there's no benefit to that. Malachi's argument is like, absolutely there is. Absolutely there is. We look at chapter 4, verse 4. It's the last verse we read in Malachi. Remember the law of Moses. Follow it. Follow his instructions. Or we look at Ecclesiastes. Very interestingly, we say, what's Ecclesiastes about? What's going on in Ecclesiastes? And Solomon spent the whole book saying, You can rise up early and go to bed late and work all day, and maybe your field won't have a crop because you're going to get a hailstorm. Meaningless. Vanity. He goes through all these things in life and calls it meaningless. And then at the end of the book, after all things has been considered, it says, now, chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, verse 13, now all has been heard. In other words, Solomon considered everything. Everything, every scenario. Now all has been heard. Here's the conclusion of the matter. Whether it winds up for you to bring you visible blessing and profit right now, or whether it means you go to jail or you die like it meant for Jesus, here's the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. This is Solomon's conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. You may get obliterated for it. You may get, like Abraham, blessed for it. But regardless, you were created to fear God and to keep his commandments. There's nothing better you can do. And it's utter foolishness to not do so, regardless of the consequences. Because a wicked man gets a righteous man's reward sometimes, and a righteous man the way. None of the appearances are anything. They're meaningless. But our souls are well cared for as we walk in his ways. And so we want to be like Job. If the external consequences of following the Lord and staying faithful to him mean that he obliterates me, I lose my wife and my kids and all my animals, my herds and my flocks and my property, well, I just shut my mouth then. I'll follow the Lord anyway. Though he slay me, yet will I serve him. There's nothing smarter for us to do in life. You may abandon the Lord, and that may mean prosperity or ruin. You may follow the Lord, and it may mean prosperity or ruin. Either way, fear the Lord and keep his commandments. For this is the whole duty of man. This is what you were created to do. This is what fits for your soul. And then, of course, he tags on, Solomon does, in verse 14, last verse. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. Eventually, everything will be just. So it makes sense. Even if doing what's right means always pain and agony, real justice is coming, and you will be rewarded for following in the Lord's ways. And it will be reward that lasts for eternity. Whereas if you follow the path, Malachi 3:14, of evil doing for prosperity, you may have prosperity until you're however old you are when you die, but then you have ruin. You have punishment for eternity after that. So know and follow God's commands. This is what we're designed to do. So our conclusion. Though the world and your sin nature tell you that walking in God's ways takes away enjoyment from life. Now remember, God says that's harsh. I created people, and I know how they are to live, to bring them maximum joy in their hearts and in their souls and in their relationships. I know this, and you're saying I'm a fool and my ideas about how to live are stupid. That's harsh, God says. And when we reject his ways, and when we reject the idea of following his ways, when we think we know better than God, God says, that's harsh. You're attacking me. You're attacking my wisdom. You're saying you know better than I. Because in fact, God's ways lead to maximum enjoyment from life. The opposite is true, in other words. Walking in God's ways. It's meant for me. I'm still married. Betsy and I will both tell you right off the bat. We'll say, "Oh, we wouldn't be married if it weren't for God." Yeah, no, we've got good marriage. And that's because walking in God's ways. What do you do when you're not like the other person? When they do things differently than you in your marriage? Do you forgive, or do you just get irritated to the point where you said, I've had enough? And so we're still married because of that. I've got kids who love me. I understand life. It's like David said in that pre-scripture reading that we had. My obedience to the law means I understand life. I have more because I obey your precepts. Okay, we get this game. I get you folks here in the church to be my friends. Some pastors say, "Oh, I'm not, I'm not friends with people in my church." And Betsy and I go, "What? And who are your friends? And what's that like?" But we all get these benefits from walking in God's ways. Great friends who love us, who forgive us, who care for us, who are out for our best. And God informs our lives and our marriages and how to parent and how to be a good kid to our parents, whether we're old or whether we're young. So indeed, a harsh thing is spoken against the Lord. To even imply that walking in his ways makes things worse. It makes your life and it makes my life so much better. So, because of this fact, here's your last sentence there. Great joy. That's what God's word says. Great joy comes from serving God. Paul says, yeah, I lost everything. But it doesn't compare to the surpassing greatness of knowing Christ, my Lord, for whom I have lost all things. Knowing him is surpassingly great. So great joy comes from serving God and caring about his honor, and following his laws, which guide us.